I've put together a sort of summary of everything that I've learned over the past 5 years from interviews with experts and actually primarily having talked to thousands of people in my community and sort of gathered a sense of a common ground of what might be going on. And I think it's really important to know that everyone's journey is different. And for some people, there will be very specific things that they need to attend to. And if they're lucky, some of that will be supported by Western medicine. But a lot of people are navigating a very sort of dark path because Western medicine doesn't have the answers for a lot of what we are going through. I am not offering this as any means of medical advice, but just as a sense of shedding a bit of light where currently it's quite difficult to find some.
I'm going to be sharing with you a set of slides, which will be available for you. We're going to put them below the YouTube interview. So if you're watching this on YouTube or you're watching it somewhere else, the slides are going to be available for you to have a look at. And you can maybe go through them again a couple of times if needs be. Okay? So without further ado, so the what is going on question, I think this is such a big question. And often when you come back from the doctors or the hospital and they basically give you maybe a diagnosis of long COVID or a diagnosis of chronic fatigue, but not necessarily a kind of a why or what can be done about it, you are left with that question yourself as a patient saying, well, what's going on? And actually, the more important question is, how can I help myself if there is nothing available? If I've gone through all of the routes and all of the options to seek some kind of Western medical sort of support, and there's nothing really available, or you've got the bare minimum and that's kind of it, how am I going to help myself recover from this? So I think that is where I'm going to be spending a little bit of time too. Now, one of the most common diagnoses is a term dysautonomia. And interestingly, when I first started to talk about it with doctors on the kind of grassroots level, we call them GPs here in the UK, many had not heard of dysautonomia. Dysautonomia is not really talked about at general level practice. It wasn't until I found a doctor, consultant cardiologist called Dr. Boon Lim, who had done a PhD at the Cambridge University Medical School in dysautonomia, that he started to shed some light on this really interesting kind of phenomena that goes on in the body. So for many people, the virus or the vaccine kicks off a significant disruption in the autonomic nervous system that is called dysautonomia. And whilst the initial illness for many may not have been very severe, the immune system kind of continues to ramp up the internal response rather than downgrade it and let you get better. It can also initiate mast cell activation syndrome. So people will often be given a diagnosis of MCAS if they're reaching the right level of understanding in the kind of medical diagnostic world where people know about MCAS. Not everyone does. And dysautonomia, I quite like to think of it as sort of the brain taking away the car keys from the teenager and saying, no, I'm driving the car because you have been a little bit, you've been a little bit out of control. You've not been looking after the car so well, so I'm taking the keys. And you do feel like you have no control over the symptoms, and they can be crushing one day and then surprisingly less so the next day. So it's a very odd illness. If you're living with someone or you care about someone who is going through this, they may have days where they appear to be doing a lot better, and then suddenly they're back in bed for 2 weeks. And that might be really confusing. It is confusing. It's also very, very confusing, frustrating, and devastating for the person who's living it. Essentially, any sense of danger that the nervous system feels from activity, either mental or physical, or maybe emotional dysregulation, upset, or cognitive exhaustion, plus other things, can cause total body shutdown. The nervous system just says, no, I'm not tolerating this anymore. I'm not safe. I'm going to put you in go slow mode. So from the dysautonomiaproject.org website, brilliant website, check it out. The top 7 symptoms of dysautonomia are difficulty or discomfort standing upright. It just makes people feel unwell, a little dizzy. Fatigue, including chronic fatigue. Lightheadedness, dizziness on standing, feeling hungover, feeling fizzy. Nausea, reflux, which can lead to chest pain, which can be really confusing. And other GI symptoms, brain fog, mental clouding, headaches, palpitations or chest discomfort, shortness of breath, or breathing difficulty. So those are our top 7 symptoms. There are many more. When the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, is dysregulated, it will generate all sorts of symptoms. But these are the top 7. And obviously, COVID and maybe even the vaccine, there will be other symptoms that the body is kind of creating, doing, manifesting as a result of this kind of insult to the body. So if we look at the organs that are affected, we've obviously got around the eyes, impaired pupil response, uncomfortable in bright light, difficulty with vision, so real sensitivity. You've got neurological, so migraine, cognitive deficit, brain fog, mental clouding. It may also affect speech. Pulmonary, shortness of breath, easily winded, difficulty breathing. Cardiovascular, so palpitations, chest discomfort, high heart rate, low heart rate. High or low blood pressure, abnormal blood vessel functioning, blood pooling in the extremities, urinary issues, so difficulty with urine retention and or excretion, and I would add into that probably more common to get UTIs. Orthostatic intolerance, we sort of already covered that in the initial 7 symptoms, but difficulty standing still, fatigue, lightheadedness, increase in symptoms with upright posture, and difficulty with dizziness on standing. Gastrointestinal, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, abdominal pain, reflux, heartburn, impaired motility. It goes on. Difficulty sweating, tearing, other fluid production, very dry eyes, very dry mouth, difficulty swallowing, dry skin. And it goes on. And there will also be, for many people, as a result of the body going through all of this kind of chaos, hair loss, and sleep disruption, and all sorts of other things that come along as a gift on this journey. So, what are the triggers? Why would one person's body respond like all of this, whereas someone else's body just gets the virus or has the vaccine and it's okay? And that's a really, really big question, and one that we don't necessarily have all of the answers to. But there are beginning to be more and more kind of anecdotal gathering of evidence around why someone's body may do something a bit more. And it won't be the answer for everyone, but for a lot of people, they may look at this list or listen to this list and go, actually, I've got a few of those. So preconditioning events, because of course we need to look at everything that's gone before in someone's body, particularly in someone's nervous system, that leads them to the point at which they meet the virus or they meet the vaccine. And then things go wrong. So maybe there's been a history of autoimmune issues like Hashimoto's, mono, Lyme, Epstein-Barr. Maybe there's a diagnosis, or maybe not a diagnosis yet, of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, joint hypermobility syndrome, a connective tissue disorder. ADHD, maybe there's a diagnosis or there's a suspicion that there may be. Is suspicion a word? I'm not sure. I'm going to say suspicion. Because ADHD is a dysregulation. That is the nature of the condition. So there's an already very dysregulated nervous system at play. Chronic background stress. Now, most of us at adulthood have got some kind of chronic background stress going on, and we just learn to tolerate it. So we might not even be aware that there is chronic background stress. But relationship stress, financial stress, global pressures, worries about the future, all of those things, they're all taking its toll on the nervous system. Maybe there's past trauma or maybe recent trauma. And it doesn't have to be kind of what we call capital T trauma, big traumatic events like, abuse, attack, accidents. They could be sort of small T trauma, sort of consistent drip fed bullying or, coercive relationship kind of abuse. There may be that your body is trying to hold onto and kind of keep covered up in the nervous system. MCAS can be a diagnosis. Obviously, there's a link to all of these things too, which need to be kind of understood as part of why the body has an overactive mast cell response. And then there's other things like pushing the body too hard for too long, or too high expectation of physical or mental ability. Maybe an ongoing kind of practice of working really hard in the gym or working really hard and long hours at work. And then the body might get ill or have the vaccine, and you're back at that too quickly, too soon. And the body just says, do you know what? I just can't do this anymore at this pace. Another gift is also just being female. Being female and 40 plus means that there's lower levels of estrogen, which act as a kind of protector hormone, just makes you more vulnerable to having more reaction in the body. But also something like a history of anxiety, a history of a dysregulated nervous system. So chances are, if you or, the person who's not well has ticked one or more of those boxes, you're going to be beginning to understand why maybe it's almost like your body was sort of primed to have a bigger response to this in the road leading up to it. So then it asks the big question, well, what can we do to help ourselves? Well, that's a really good question. Because often when we see a doctor and they kind of go, well, we don't really have the magic bullet. You could try this, you could do this, and you do those things, and none of them really make that much of a difference, or it might give you a kind of 5% incremental shift. And you go, okay, well, what do I do now? Well, actually, one of the things that I really want people to understand is that if you're left at a kind of, station when someone says, we don't have anything else for you, sitting at the station and just waiting for a train that you've been told isn't going to come until the research has been done and the magic bullet has been made isn't going to take you anywhere new or different. So this is where we have to start to learn about how do we create in our bodies and in our autonomic nervous systems a state that is going to help us heal. So how can we create an environment that allows the body to be optimal for healing? Because often the worry, the anxiety, the fear, the upset, the grief, the loss, all of that is kind of crushing us. And we're not really able to optimize a healing state if that is our focus every single day, which of course it will be, because we've never been this ill. So it's a really important paradigm shift. We have to kind of come into a place where we say, right, I'm going to heal you myself, or at least I'm going to start helping myself, rather than not doing anything and waiting. So I had an aha moment myself. I knew a bit about the autonomic nervous system, having trained as a yoga teacher and a counselor. And I'd gone into hospital and I'd had the tests, and they went, yeah, we can see you're really not well, but there's nothing we can give you. So they sent me away without even giving me a paracetamol. And I just kind of knew at that point, right, this is in my hands. So I've had the kind of, there's nothing terribly scary that we can find in you. So I said, is it autonomic nervous system related? And they went, well, it might be, it's looking like it's showing up in all the places where a dysregulation there could be having an impact. So I just tuned into my own tuition, and my own tuition went, you need to relax. You need to find other people that are doing this with you. And you need to not focus on how horribly ill you feel. And you need to start laughing again. There was just a really clear message from me that I needed more joy in order to help my body shift into that autonomic nervous kind of parasympathetic activation, that bit where we are in rest, digest, repair. That's the bit that becomes almost inaccessible when the body is really dysregulated. And you can see on the screen, there's a picture of an article, which was the real kind of moment for me where I went, okay. And it's from The Atlantic, and it's called Unlocking the Mysteries of Long COVID. And actually this article, so April 2021, so quite early on, we were a year into the pandemic. And at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, there's a great guy who was running a clinic working with people who were having post-COVID complications. And David Putrino, he got in touch with some Navy SEALs who had created a breathing program which helped regulate autonomic nervous system function. And he asked for access to this program, which was an online program that these guys had created. And it was called the Stasis Breathing Program. And he was giving people, his patients, access to this for free. He didn't just give it to his patients, he gave it to the world for free. So I was over here in the UK going, oh my goodness, guys, look, this guy has given us all access, free access to this program. I think you have to pay now. But at the time, it was an incredibly generous gift. Thank you, Stasis. I have interviewed the founder, Josh Dunstan. It was an amazing interview. And that was the moment that I realized, because in the Petrino labs, he was having results that were becoming sort of quite important to take notice of. People were beginning to say that they were starting to feel a bit better. So, and that was just from breath work. That was from doing pure breath work. Now, it's hard to heal and do alone, do these things alone. And it's really hard to kind of go, okay, so I'm the most ill I've ever been and I'm going to do breath work. Yay. So when doctors tell us there's no simple solution, there is a danger of giving up. And lots of us need extra motivation, reassurance, inspiration, especially when we're sick, because the road can be really long, but you might as well start the journey doing what you can, what's available to you, rather than staying stuck in your pit of despair. It's fine to be in your pit of despair for a bit. You kind of have to be there for a bit. But then at some point, hopefully you go, what am I going to do? What am I going to do differently to see if I can bring about a change myself? So that's a really powerful place. So as human beings, in order to heal, we need, amongst other things, and I have definitely found this myself, safety, connection, reassurance, rest, and we're really bad at rest, regulation, and consistency. So you're not just going to do breath work for a week and go, well, I've done it for a week and I've had no change, so I'm going to give up. You're actually going to do it for weeks and maybe weeks, but not just breath work, because actually breath work isn't for everyone. Some people just can't get on with it, and that's fine. I myself, I'm a bit rubbish at breath. So what do we do? What are the tools that I now use in my program and recommend to other people? Well, basically anything that helps your vagus nerve to kind of reactivate the parasympathetic side of your autonomic nervous system. Again, let me remind you, it's the part of the body that activates rest, digest, and repair. And we are essentially stuck up in that sympathetic response state, which is just fight, flight, freeze. So you're either in shutdown or you're in hypervigilant, hyper-anxiety alert, which is not going to be encouraging the body to create the healing environment. So even if you don't believe that this is going to heal everything for you, working to regulate the autonomic nervous system to create the healing environment, it feels like a no-brainer. But anyway, we encourage people to do things like gentle movement. So not exercise. Do not exercise your way out of this. That will not work. But with practices like Qigong, EFT, so tapping, emotional freedom technique, gentle yoga, but not yoga that you would see in a yoga studio, just like maybe 2 or 3 tiny movements and then lots of rest. Breath work, we've already talked about. Recognition of and reducing fear of symptoms. This is really important, and it may need coaching. And there are lots of courses available online. Laughter and joy. That's a surprising one, right? Because you're thinking, well, how can I be joyful and how can I access laughter if I am this unwell? Well, it's really important that you let a little bit of space in for it, because joy is the opposite of fear. And actually what we're trying to do is take the brain's hyperfocus away from fear and remind it that actually there are things in the world which are safe, not only safe, but actually quite nice. So helping ourselves with that is super important. Group connection, community activity like art sessions and poetry writing and, just getting together and watching a film, but doing it collectively with other people who share your lived experience. So you feel recognized and validated. That's super important. Mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, just noticing thoughts, knowing that we are not our thoughts. Our thoughts come and go. Our thoughts are like clouds. Because we can identify with our thoughts so much that we can just become overwhelmed by them. Deep guided relaxation, something like yoga nidra. So it's quite difficult to rest. But if you're putting on a yoga nidra, and there's loads on YouTube, it helps us guide ourselves into that rest state. Peer support and sharing tips and knowledge and wisdom. Hey, have you tried this? Hey, my doctor's put me on this drug. Who's tried it? What was it like? All of that's really important. And then counseling for those who need to process the grief and the loss of self, because this is huge. If someone hasn't been able to work for 6 months and it's a job that they really love, or someone hasn't been able to parent their children in the way that they want to, or they just haven't been able to go and do the things that they love and engage in, the grief around that is phenomenal. And we really do need a safe space to talk about it. Does it all actually help? So, what I'm going to read out here, and it's probably really tiny text for you, is just a bit of feedback from people who've been on my program and found it really helpful. And I can say, looking down the three names there, that all three of those people are back to life, living their lives. I was recommended, says John, the RRR program by my long COVID specialist consultant, GP Dr. Paul Glynn. It has been one of the key pillars of my recovery journey, and the variety of classes have been super helpful in managing the impacts on my health and day-to-day life. The community has been an absolutely essential element, providing connection, understanding, and a sense of fun and joy despite illness we are dealing with. They are a recovery lifeline. Mel says, RRR offered much more than I could have hoped for. The principle of calming and regulating the nervous system made complete sense to me, together with the need to listen to and respect my body. The feeling of community, connection, and fun, coupled with great skill in the team, were invaluable. And Georgie, I saw months and months of absolutely no improvement before I started RRR. And I was on sick leave from work, unable to leave the house or do basic things like cook for myself and shower standing up. The program helped me feel empowered to trust my body, to learn how to recover. Breathwork, gentle movement, strong sense of community allowed me to begin my own personal recovery journey that was not reliant on a drug being developed to help. I'm doing so much better now. It's almost unbelievable. So there we go. 3 people's testimonials, which I think are kind of important sometimes because people want to hear from the people that actually are doing the work rather than just me. And then I've got a further reading list here. So we've got Breath by James Nestor, Cured by Dr. Jeff Rediger, brilliant book. The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk. Quite a brutal book to read if you're in the thick of kind of processing any trauma work. When the Body Says No, Dr. Gabor Mate, The Way Out by Dr. Alan Gordon. That's around getting the brain to relearn safety. The Pocket Guide to Polyvagal Theory by Dr. Stephen Porges. His is all about safety, connection, and co-regulation. And the website's dysautonomiaproject.org, potsuk.org, but I know there's loads of global POTS information sites. Dysautonomiainternational.org, chronicallyawesome.org.uk. So lots of places for further information. So hopefully you will begin to understand that the illness is definitely life-changing, and there isn't an easy fix and an easy win. And the good days don't mean that you're recovered. They just mean that the body is beginning to figure out that recovery might be an option. So the most important thing is to not rush and to really invest in your own well-being, which we're never taught to do in society. We're not taught to really look after ourselves. We're taught to achieve. We're taught to accomplish. We're taught to gather and accumulate. And whilst we talk about stress, we don't necessarily talk about the negative impact on it. If you've got this kind of, let's just use the metaphor of a bucket. And throughout life, all of these experiences that we're having, which are kind of upsetting or, troubling, maybe traumatic, maybe upsetting, and they're all kind of going into the bucket. And at some point, we get to a point where the bucket's just full. And some people's buckets fill up quicker than others. But at some point, the bucket is full, and that makes you a very, very vulnerable kind of possibility to having much bigger response to a virus like COVID or the vaccine injury, like sort of against someone else. Because of course, I'm sure, lots of people who had no big response to the virus, who had no big response to the vaccine. So the question is, well, why did my body do that? Obviously comes up again and again. And if you are caring for someone who is dealing with this, they need time. And you need to not be saying to them, so now that you're better, because I can see you've had a few days where you're kind of up and out, right? Can you take on this task? Can you take on that? And when are you going to go back to work? So where possible, try to protect that kind of fragile, repairing nervous system. It's a bit like a plant that's new and it's just beginning to grow roots. And as soon as you see that shoot's coming up, you're kind of lifting it up, going, great. So now can we go back? Can we go back to how things were? And the little tiny roots will die instantly. So they do need time to be bedded in the soil to get more strength, more stability, and to kind of heal from all of the things that they need to be healing from. So I'm really happy to always answer questions. Type them below in the YouTube thread and we will see them. Okay? Hopefully that helps just some of you.